Oh boy. Natka, I have a question here, and the question is a highly ranked question, and the question says, what are some of the similarities and differences between everyday people in Russia and everyday people in the US? Any fun trivia to share? So I'm just going to talk about some of the things that we talked about Russian people and American people. I'm not so much asking your permission as just telling you about to do it because you're sitting right here. Somebody wants to know what everyday people in Russia are like compared to everyday people in America. And I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them the good and the bad. I just wanted to, yes, I just wanted to brace yourself so that you didn't, burst into flames or anything. Here's the first thing I learned from being engaged to a Russian woman, and I learned this pretty quickly, and that is that I'd be willing to bet you, unless you've been there in the last year or two, I'd be willing to bet you that just about every single American's image of Russia, specifically Moscow, is way, way out of date. Way out of date. Needless to say, most Americans are, certainly the kind of people who listen to this show, know that it's no longer the Soviet Union, that you're no longer waiting in lines for bread in stores, and that the situation got a little better. But the thing that just really shook me up the most is just how unbelievably advanced that city is. It's just unbelievable. They, when you control the entire wealth of a country and you've got one guy saying we're going to do something, Moscow is astonishingly modern. The cars are amazing. The buildings are largely brand new. The streets are immaculately clean. People are much better dressed than they are in America, probably even better dressed than they are on the streets of New York, I would say, from what I could see. And our entire idea of this society as being kind of this creaky, backwards kind of thing is just not true anymore. That was a bit of a surprise for me. One of the things that I enjoyed quite a lot, was watching Soviet-era movies. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. But I'm here to tell you, we saw together, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 Soviet-era comedies, and they're hilarious. And if the American people had seen those movies during the Cold War, I want to say they were mostly written in the mid-'60s, late '60s, early '70s, we would have had a different opinion about Russians. I think my favorite one is called Ivan Vasilievich Changes His Occupation. And basically, it's a story of a guy who builds a time machine in his apartment flat, and I like it already. And the kind of petty and small-minded little apartment owner, not owner, the supervisor, the guy who reports to the authorities, little petty little tyrant. Well, it turns out this time machine opens this portal to the court of Ivan the Terrible. And needless to say, they switch places. They look exactly the same. And the modern little petty dictator goes back to the court of Ivan. And what is just actually genuinely hilarious is Ivan the Terrible comes to, 1969 Russia and acts like, Ivan the Terrible. It's wonderful. I've seen a bunch of their movies. They're just really terrific, and she's going to have to help me out with this. But I don't think there's an American counterpart for this. There are 3 actors, 3 Russian comedians, comic actors. They're not comedians, they're comic actors. And the 3 of them have done an awful lot of work together. I don't know how many films, but I bet it's 20. That's one thing about watching Soviet movies is that it's a pretty small cast. It's a good cast. They're fine actors and they're fine productions, but relatively small compared to the number of people in Hollywood, let's say. However, there's these 3 guys. One of them is very large and kind of bald and fat and strong, and then one of them has got the face of a clown and was a great clown and has a lot of pathos, a lot of feeling, a lot of depth. And then there's this other guy who's kind of this prissy sort of neurotic coward, and the three of them appear or star in any number of movies. There's probably no end to it. It's, oh, here they are again. Here they are again. Sometimes the whole movie's about them. Sometimes they just show up. Sometimes it's a little short about them, but here they are again. Sarge 56 said the Three Stooges. I thought that at first too, but this you can't compare these three guys to the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges, I'm a huge fan of the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges are essentially a one-trick pony, right? It's physical comedy, it's slapstick comedy, and Curly throws in some comic genius just for the giggles. But these guys are not nearly that simple. Any Three Stooges story is virtually interchangeable. And again, I'm a huge fan. I think it's brilliant work. But this is much more subtle than this. It's much more interesting. And these three guys are tremendous. Now, what's especially interesting about this is Natasha was telling me that when she was growing up in Moscow, the they don't have Christmas over there. They have it, but they don't celebrate it on the 25th of December. They celebrate it in January. And the big holiday in Moscow, in Russia, is New Year's. New Year's Eve. I'm quite sure that's because New Year's is a non-Christian, non-religious celebration, and people want to celebrate. And if you've got an atheistic society like the Soviets, you got to celebrate something. So they just basically took everything that they used to do at Christmas and they do it on New Year's, and Christmas became a much, much smaller celebration. But New Year's in Russia is a combination of our New Year's in terms of it being a big party, but you have to add in all of Christmas, all of the gift giving, all of the camaraderie, all of the people outdoors, and then the clock at the center of the Kremlin with the golden hand strikes 12, and then Vladimir Putin comes out and talks to the Russian people, and then they party. But what's interesting about the New Year's thing for me was that when Natasha was growing up, back when it was still the late days of the Soviet Union, these comedy movies I was talking about, they'd run them once. They'd run them once a year, and they'd run them at midnight on New Year's at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I guess it's kind of like a safety valve. And all of her friends would just wait for this night, because one night they'd get to stay up all night and watch movies that were genuinely subversive. They weren't destructive of the Soviet state, but they certainly made fun of it. It wasn't the kind of toxic kind of attacks that we see sometimes here against America, but it was definitely having fun with the Soviet system, and it was a pretty fine line to watch. So they don't run those every day. It's like here, it's almost like like that stupid American movie, The Purge. It's like for 12 hours we're going to give you a little taste of freedom here and a little taste of rebellion and so on. So that I thought was very interesting. My favorite thing by far about the difference between American people and Russian people is something that that Natasha still notices. We were just away for Valentine's Day, and still shocks her, and seeing it through her eyes makes me very proud and very very much more aware of it than I used to be. And that's simply this: when she first came here on her first visit, she could not believe how friendly people were in America. She literally had a hard time believing it. I want to say the first time I really noticed this was when we got back to L.A. and went to Whole Foods, and we're stacking up groceries, and the guy says, "Hey, did you find anything?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely great, thanks." I said, "How you doing?" "Good, I'm good. How are you?" "Fine, fine." And start this little conversation. She's standing there practically with her mouth open, just agape at the idea that somebody in service would be talking to the customers as if we were friends, as if we were equals, and we are. And time again, I could see it on her face. Any interaction, any social interaction between people who were professionally there versus their customers. Anytime we went to a restaurant, anytime we went to a retail store, anytime we went anywhere where somebody was behind a counter serving somebody else, she was just astonished at how friendly Americans were and are, and how open we are. And I think she's got it right. This is certainly my feeling about Russians before I met Natasha as well. Americans are very simple, and that's not a bad thing. It's a different thing. Some people think that means we're really stupid. Well, we can see your house from the moon, so I don't know how stupid that makes us, but there you go. But we're very simple, I think, really. our culture is not terribly deep, and that's okay with me. I don't come from a culture with a 400-year tradition of poetry and Pushkin and Tolstoy. I come from a culture where the only poetry I know is the theme song to Gilligan's Island and the Beverly Hillbillies. And that's fine with me. But it is a lot more simple people, and it's a lot more happy people. It's a lot more friendly people. And the other thing I think that struck me as a big difference between life in America and life in Russia is that she is astonished, amazed, mortified, and furious at the amount of money that this government takes from people like me in taxes. Absolutely outraged and astonished. She's going to be a fine American conservative, she already is. Astonished that the federal and state governments might take 40% of what I make and provide nothing in return. Our streets are filthy. Our airports are appalling. We arranged to meet in New York City, and she was held up in customs for 3 hours. That's just in customs. I was embarrassed. I was really embarrassed, but I wasn't even ready for what was coming out. Much later, she told me that everybody dreams about going to New York. Natasha had been all around the world, been to London, Paris, Europe, everywhere. She's been everywhere, Egypt, many times, but she'd never been to America before. So we decided to meet in New York City, and she said that when she got off the plane, she could not believe that this was America because the airport was so dingy and old and dirty and just nasty. It just looked like a third world country. Now, John F. Kennedy, I had to tell her, because I got to do something to salvage this. John F. Kennedy International Airport was the first modern airport. It was the first one. I remember seeing it when I was a kid in 1965 or 6. The Pan Am terminal at JFK was a wonder. It was a wonder of the world. It was astonishing. But that was 1965, and it hasn't changed much since then. When we flew to Los Angeles and fought the traffic back out of LAX, and I had to explain to her that Los Angeles, California, which is the center of the universe in terms of culture, the center of the world, it's not just the center of America, it's the center of the world. This is Los Angeles, California, had one airport. She simply couldn't believe it. And a dingy one, an old one, one airport. Moscow has 3. I know London has at least 2. We've got one airport here. And it just utterly astonishes her. And when she finds out how much we pay in taxes here, she gets quite angry. And that's kind of how I feel too, although I hadn't really realized it. So having her here meant that I was aware of people's friendliness in a way I wasn't before, and I'm also aware of the condition of roads in a way I never was before. I'm just used to driving down the 405 and bump, 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 bump. That's just what it is. And when you find out that Russia, you remember they used to be the communists. Remember those guys? Remember the backward people who couldn't build a car and all dressed the same? Remember those guys? At least in Moscow and major cities, their infrastructure is spectacular, and ours is appalling. And she can't understand how a government could take as much money as they do from us and provide such awful, awful, awful infrastructure. And I don't have an answer for it. It just makes me more aware of it. So there's that. So she's very impressed by the friendliness of people. I haven't been to Moscow yet. I will be there in the summer. And by the way, it's Moscow, and it's not Moscow. Moscow. It's Moscow. And the reason I know this is because we were driving along in the car one day, and we were passing a farm, and she looked out the window and said, "Oh, look at all the cows." All the what? The cows. Those, the cows. I mean, the cows? Yes, the cows. And it's like, no, it looks like Moscow, and everybody I've ever heard pronounce it as Moscow, but it's Moscow. Or Moskova, if you're really in the know. So there's that. Now, there's one more thing I think I'll talk about, because we were talking about this last night, and this is it's a good one for Team America. Not only are we friendly people, we have something that's virtually unknown in Russia, and it's one of the reasons that Russia is in the shape it's in. And Natasha said that after being here for almost 6 months, she cannot believe that nobody here that she meets, because she only meets conservatives. Now, we got to keep that in mind. She just meets conservatives, which are obviously the best people in the world. But she says that of all the people that she's met here, no one is envious. No one's jealous. If you succeed in America, she says, people are happy for you. Russia's the exact opposite of that. If anybody gets anything better than anybody else, that person must be destroyed. They have to be pulled down. The idea that somebody's doing better than you are is just anathema, and it fills them with rage and anger. Um, and uh, and that's part of the. That's actually a much more important thing than you think, because as we were talking about yesterday in a couple trips we've taken back from 3-hour trip from San Diego and so on, we were talking about that since that in America we're happy for people's success because we all know we can attain it. We all know that we can that if we work hard and stay at it, we can have most of the things that people want. And when you're locked into a society where that's not possible, you're filled with resentment because you're powerless. That's what the story is inside America's inner cities. And so it's really true. It's actually true what we all heard when we were kids, that the difference between a capitalist and a communist is if somebody's looking at a beautiful house, the communist says no one should live like that, and the capitalist says everyone should live like that. It's really actually true. We trust each other here in a way that they don't in Moscow. The thing that enraged me the most, and virtually everything that I've learned about Russia. Look, I found a Russian fiance because I love Russian culture and I love the people. I love their history. We've been opposed to them in many ways, and they've done some terrible things. We've done some things too, but it's an incredibly deep country with a huge soul, and they talk about poetry, and they talk about music, and there's so much tragedy there. There's just so much tragedy. So much blood that's been spilled there, and things that we can never ever imagine here in happy, simple America. We can never imagine what it's like to have an army come right to the heart of our country and kill 20 million soldiers and maybe another 20 million civilians, and have that happen a couple of times with Napoleon, which just can't connect to it. So there's this. The first thing I noticed about talking with her, was when we were trying to do something, or trying to do any kind of administrative thing, like get a ticket here or there, or move something from one place to another, or send a gift over, or something like that. It would take forever. And the reason it would take forever most of the time was because it was held up in some kind of Russian system. And every time I would say, well, how is it possible that you guys don't use banks? I mean, I can't imagine a world like that. So that's Russia. And this, I think, is a very big difference. The American kind of catastrophe is that we pay so much money and we get so little in return. It's absolutely shocking when you see it from the outside like that. The Russian problem is that they do not believe that you can make money. They don't believe that wealth can be created, and that's because they largely don't have a chance to create wealth. Guys, here's the best story I ever heard about modern Russia. And once you hear this story, you understand that country, and you understand everything that's right and wrong with that country. Yes, I remember the Civil War, Jim. I know that the South experienced it, but as a nation, as a modern nation, we don't have any memory of it. But here's the story. Here's the story you need to know about Russia. It was told to me by Sasha, the guy who set up that church that I promoted. I'm going to promote again a little bit. In Russia, there was a true story, obviously, and a recent story. He's a chicken farmer. He raises chickens as a business, and because he raises them in such a way, they're done very well. And something about the method that they're brought up in, that these chickens, the method that they're fed, and the method that they're raised and slaughtered and all the rest, cleared a bar with Iran, with Iranians. And as it turned out, it's very rare for chickens to be processed in such a way that these extremely religious Iranians were comfortable with, but this guy was doing it. And so these Iranian businessmen came to this Russian businessman with his little chicken farm out in the middle of nowhere, and they said, "We are going to make you very, very rich. we are going to give you so much business that you are not going to know what to do with all the money. There's an enormous demand for this back home, and we are going to make you really, really wealthy, and your business is going to get very big and very profitable. And the guy said no, he turned him down. And the Iranian said, well, why would you do that? And the guy said, if I become a big company, then the government will take everything. Not just a lot of taxes. They'll take everything. They'll take the business. They'll take the property. They'll take the cars. They'll just take it. He said that the only way he's able to live relatively comfortably is to be small enough as to be under the radar. There's not enough there for him to really worry too much about the state coming in and just taking everything he has. That is astonishing to Americans. I'll tell you what else is astonishing to an American kid. The level of corruption, if you have a court case, the court case is often not settled by who's got the best claim or who's got the best lawyer. It's often settled by who can pay the most money to the judge in order to get the judgment they want. But of all the little things I heard about kind of, corruption, the one that blew my mind was that Natasha was telling me that rich people in Moscow, and there's quite a few of them, if they're in a hurry to get across town, hang on now, they will contact emergency services. I don't know exactly how this happens, but they basically contact the people that provide an ambulance. And for enough money, the ambulance will light up with lights and sirens and go screaming through the center of the city, and everybody will get out of the way, and the people who paid them will be right behind them. And basically, they have paid first responders to make a path through traffic, and that's just a cash transaction. And not only is the person who paid for them right behind them, but she said there's also 4 or 5 other cars that are trying to sneak in there and get into the wake of this flashing sirens and everything. It's just astonishing. We just sit there and just amazed. But what I found is that they are very, very deep people, very intelligent people, and very good people. But you got to get to know them. It's not like America where we all are pretty much happy. So what's the problem? It's a society that's had that many people killed, either from overseas agents or from internally. When you have 70, 80 years, and that's just the communists, the czars as well. 70, 80 years of, if you say something, you could be arrested or taken away in the middle of the night. And if you had any innovation, you'd be gone. The great tragedy of the Soviets is that you could have people working on a collective farm, and they're into it. They believe in the Soviet dream. They're building a new Russia. This backwards agricultural country is becoming an industrial powerhouse, and they're the first ones in space. And so there's so many Russians who believed in Soviet communism. And the problem is that you could have a guy working on a collective farm, and he could basically raise his hand and say, comrades, there's a better way to do this. If we do this, and this, we'll get more work done, and we'll have more resources. And he's doing it out of love for the Soviet state. He's doing it because he loves the idea of the Soviet Union, and he's just trying to help the collective farm do better. Well, that guy's taken out and killed, and the reason he's taken out and killed, now it doesn't happen today, obviously, but in the 30s and 20s, 30s, and 40s, certainly, and then somewhat in the 50s. The reason he was taken out and killed was because he's a free thinker, because he's got his own opinion. He's got the courage to raise his hand, and he's got the intelligence to come up with a solution that no one else has seen, and he's also willing to embarrass the people who've been running the factory or the collective farm this way and show them that they were doing it wrong. And that person has to be killed because they're dangerous. They're dangerous to a totalitarian state. That person's got moral courage, got intelligence, got initiative, and that won't do. And when you literally, genuinely, literally comb those people out of society for 70, 80 years, you are left with a society that's extremely suspicious, and for good reason. for good reason. Nobody walks up and says, "Hey, how's it going?" To strangers, or smile in the elevators. "Hey, good, oh, good. What floor are you going to? 12. Okay, hey, how's your day?" "Well, it's good. I asked you got Kentucky Fried Chicken." "Yeah, well, okay, well, you have a good day." "Okay, you too." It doesn't happen over there. And the reason it doesn't happen over there is because if you have a conversation like that and you let something slip, you could be killed, and your family could be killed. And when you do that long enough, it naturally enough breeds a sort of a very closed secretiveness about it. But underneath all of that is a huge heart, a huge emotional depth that's been compressed by the nastiness that comes down from them, on them from above, and gives the Russian people a seriousness and a depth that we don't have here. We just don't. We don't have it here because we didn't suffer the way they've suffered. And suffering is what they've done. It makes for some interesting differences. With all of that said, I think the Russian people and the American people are very similar in many, many ways. They're both big countries, and we both think like people from big countries. Natasha loves these trucks, not just these little, toy pickup trucks. She loves these gigantic, huge, Ford or Chevy trucks, these enormous, huge, wide things with, front doors and then back doors, and there's a compartment, and this whole thing, and they're spotlessly clean, and they're brand new. She just loves them, and she loves them because it's a sign of individuality, and there's nobody telling you anything. She occasionally says, Sarge, I'll answer this for you in 1 second. So she loves that. And there's a word, we were talking about this last night. There's a word that she's used here a couple times, and I realized that I know what the word means, but I don't think I've ever used this word in my life. And that word is forbidden. Is this forbidden? Is it forbidden to do this? Or are we allowed to, do we need a passport to go to Vegas? Do we have to show papers? Is it forbidden, 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 forbidden? She was telling me ever since she's a little girl, she's told what's forbidden and what's not. And forbidden, if I told you guys that something, anything, doesn't matter whether it was important, doesn't matter whether you liked it or not, if I told you it's forbidden, your first reaction as Americans is to say, who the hell are you to tell me what's forbidden and what's not? I got it, guys. I see the question. I'll get to it in a second. It's an American reaction. Rebellion and initiative pays off here. It's how we think. We were created from rebels against the most powerful army and society in the world at the time. We were natural rebels. You're forbidden from doing this. Who the hell are you to tell me anything about what I'm going to do? Who are you? I don't care if you've got a badge. It means nothing to me. What gives you the authority to tell me I can't do this? That's an American attitude, and that's very, very, very different because it's been rewarded here. That kind of behavior in Russia for a century or so has gotten you killed. And so, as with so many immigrants, it's heartbreaking to explain to her what these socialists are trying to do, because they know. Everybody's asking me the same question. Now, there's one guy who had this question, and then it's been repeated by everybody, and they think I keep ignoring it, but I see it. So here's the question. It's been in capital letters, and I was going to answer it, and I realized I'm going to just let you answer it. And here's the question, Natasha. Besides me, obviously, what do you like best about the U.S.?
People.
The people. Can you tell me more about that?
Happy.
Happy? Open?
Generous.
Generous?
And smiling.
And smiling. Yeah, thank you. That's it. That's pretty much it. Happy, open, generous, and smiling. America's Disneyland, and we don't realize it, and you won't know how much of a Disneyland you live in until you go someplace that's not Disneyland, and then it'll come to you. Which is that a vacuum? Thought it might have been a drone strike or something coming in. We don't appreciate that, and Tom Bizzell says, "Who's bidden?" This is forbidden. Who's bidden? Got a laugh there, Tom Bizzelli. Got a laugh from my fiance. Well done. Who's bidden? And why does he own all this stuff? That's forbidden. That's forbidden too. Who is this guy? By the way, Dave Wellman just says, "You can't park here." I believe I just did. But there's this classic story, true story about an Englishman visiting America in the 1800s and comes up against a cowboy, some ranch, just a cowboy. And he looks like a working cowboy, and he's, dirty, and he's dusty, and he's got his hat on, and he's, picking up his saddle and all the rest of it. And this British guy says, "My good man, what is the name of your master?" Meaning he wanted to talk to the guy in charge. And the cowboy turned to him, he said, "That some bitch ain't been born yet." And, there it is. They want you to come to the mic. They're like begging you to come over here on camera and say hi. Oh, she's such a trooper here. Okay, here's the drum roll.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Come on in, as last time. Hi everybody, and thank you for the many kind words. We were looking at the comments from the picture we posted on Facebook the other day, and you have no idea how much it means to us. We went down and did an event in San Diego a couple days ago, and being able to point to her in the crowd and stand up on stage and say, this is my fiance, and she's the best photographer I've ever seen, it's wonderful for me. But everybody that she's met, and she's met a few people here, everybody that she's met has been gracious and kind and generous and all the rest. And that's because they're you. That's because they're you people. That's because I got the best people in the world.
That's true.
That is true.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say to the American savages out there?
No, I would like to say that I appreciate being here very, very much. And I love those people.
And that's from an American who happened to be born overseas. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wave goodbye to the happy folks. Natasha's an American, happened to be born overseas, and I find myself really feeling very, very proud to think that on some level I'm half Russian. I'm obviously not exactly half Russian, but they're my people now. And there's so much there. There's so much there. There's so much intelligence. There's so many resources. There's so much there. And it's just got to be set free. It's just got to be set free, but it's going to be very, very difficult. These attitudes are just built so deep into the culture. It's very, very tough. But I love them already, and it's been enormous fun for me, and a great delight and an honor and a joy to get introduced to this country that is my country now too, that I haven't been to yet, and I feel like I'm starting to get to know. I mean, it's going to be a kick for this guy who wanted to be an Air Force pilot for first third of his life to do what I'm going to do in several months or so, somewhere in the summer, and that is I'm going to be doing live reports from Red Square. And I'll be in Red Square, and we'll be doing either Facebook Live or we'll record segments that we'll then, put up on Facebook here and on our website. And I'm going to be standing in Red Square, and behind me will be the Kremlin, the real Kremlin, the Kremlin. It's unbelievable. We're going to Washington for CPAC. If any of you are going to be there, and she gets to see Washington. Washington's not quite the den of vipers that it was prior to November, but it's still a fairly disgraceful place given the history of this country and what actually goes on in Washington. However, with that said, Washington, D.C. is spectacularly beautiful. Everybody says that we love having you here in America and things like that, so it's just really sweet. When you go, I saw the Capitol building, I want to say is 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, 2009, 10, somewhere in there, so 6, 7 years ago, I guess. And I understand how this country works, but when I stood there on the mall and looked up at the Capitol building, it's almost unreal how beautiful that building is. It doesn't seem like it could be real. it's so classical. It's so classically perfect, and at the same time, it represents so much freedom, so much power, so much success, and and it's been badly abused lately. And I'll wrap this discussion up by telling you the one thing. I told you many things where it makes me feel good to be American. Here's the thing that makes me genuinely, not only ashamed, but genuinely worried, and that is to hear how often I hear that Russia is a much freer place than America is in many, 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 many different ways. Despite the fact that there's all these things that are forbidden, there are things in American culture that were restricted from doing by those nasty progressives, and to hear that Russia has freedoms to do things that we don't have in America anymore is enough to make me just plain batty. It just makes me nuts. Oh, and somebody says when I see, speaking of the Capitol being so beautiful, they said when I first see St. Basil's for the first time, I'm going to have the same reaction. It's just like, it can't possibly be real, you know. When I first met her, I told her I wanted to visit Moscow, but I wanted to go in the winter because, you know, what's the point of seeing Moscow if you don't go in the winter? I mean, everything about Moscow, the history of Moscow, and everything I know about Moscow has been the winter. You know, you stop the Napoleon sacks Moscow and burns it to the ground, and then he goes home and he's stopped by the winter. And the Russians are they're 8 miles outside of Moscow, and the Germans are stopped by the winter and the cold. And Moscow is the coldest place in the world. And if you're going to go see Moscow for the first time, you should go in the winter. And then she told me about how absolutely insane that is. And having watched the weather reports in Moscow lately, I begin to realize, no, that's just batty. It's negative 30 degrees out there and windy. Here's a cute little thing that I wasn't expecting, by the way. Once she got to Los Angeles, and she was here in July and August, and for the entire time that she's been here since then, Natasha has never been this cold, ever. She's constantly talking about how cold it is, and I know that sounds contradictory and just nuts, but we fight we fight outdoors, right? In America, we run the air conditioning so often and so frequently, and so intensely that the inside of a building in America, I'll bet you, is 15 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than it is in Russia. In Russia, in the winter, you've got it negative 30 degrees outside, and when you go inside a building, you want to be warm right away. And I suspect that one of the things I'm going to notice is I'm probably going to be about as uncomfortable temperature-wise in Russia as Natasha has been here. While she's being freezing cold all the time, I'm going to be able, like, my God, I simply don't know how I can breathe. It's 80 degrees Fahrenheit inside these buildings, because if they turn the heat off, everybody dies. You know, it's kind of a downer. So it is interesting for me to be the kid who was born in New York City, but I grew up in Bermuda, Florida, and California, and I'm walking around in in a T-shirt. It's 57 something Fahrenheit. It's brisk. It's not cold. It's brisk, and she's from Siberia, and she's freezing, and it's just interesting and cool. Boy, so many comments here. You need to take me to Banya. Big laugh. What's Banya?
Sauna, but it's different.
It's a different kind of sauna?
Mm-hmm.
All right, then. I'm going to book my trip
It's
to...
very Russian.
Book my trip to Banya right away. We have to do Banya. We have to do a report on Banya or from Banya, something like that. She's laughing again. I think I'm in for a pleasant or a weird surprise. So anyway, I'll be going in the summer. We've got her visa status is interesting. When you apply for resident alien card, your tourist visa goes away, and you don't have a new one yet, and you basically become kind of in no man's land. But needless to say, we're going to do this exactly the right way, and we're waiting in line. It's a 3-year process, and it's thousands of dollars, and worth every bit of it. And she's not only looking forward to being a resident alien, she's looking forward to being a citizen. if only she could find somebody who could describe to her how America works so she could pass the citizenship test. That's going to be the challenge for her, is finding somebody who could clue her in on things like how the Congress works and stuff like that. Well, it's been a fun show, actually. Been a really fun show. It's 20 after 8. I think we'll call it a night. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys. It's nice to be talking to you every day on the live show, for those of you that are watching. And again, the Stratosphere Lounge is a special show. I've never seen anything quite like it anywhere. I've seen a lot of webcam shows, and I've seen a lot of commentators, but I've never seen a show quite like this. This personal with the people who we see every single week for years and years and years now. 5 years, I think, it's coming up, 5 years. So it's an absolute joy. It's like a family meeting. It's like seeing friends again.